Terrence Willis was just a father cheering from the sidelines until someone called the cops. They dragged him off a children's soccer field for being black. What they didn't know. Terrence was a decorated Navy commander with connections that reached the Pentagon. His daughter filmed everything, and when her video went viral, the whole town's racist secrets began to crumble. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, this was war, and Darlington had just picked the wrong man. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun poured over Darlington Park like it always did on Saturdays. Soft, golden, unbothered. Kids in red and white jerseys darted across the trimmed green grass, their laughter clashing with the shrill whistles of overzealous coaches. Folding chairs lined the field edges, occupied by mostly white parents sipping coffee from monogrammed tumblers. They cheered, sighed, and laughed, perfectly at ease. Then something shifted. A black man stepped onto the scene. Commander Terrence Willis stood tall as he approached the sideline, his Navy-issued sunglasses catching glints of light. He wore a simple gray hoodie over his athletic frame, jeans that were too neat to be casual, and sneakers with barely a scuff. His presence wasn't loud, but it stirred the air like a quiet thunder. He scanned the field until he found her, Ava, his daughter, darting past two defenders like wind. She wore number 7, his favorite number. His chest swelled with pride, but his smile stayed restrained, not out of discomfort but out of learned habit, because joy for a black man in certain spaces always risked being mistaken for threat. Terrence moved closer to the sidelines, still outside the ropes, and waved. Ava spotted him, her face instantly breaking into a toothy grin. She waved back, calling out, "Daddy," before kicking the ball toward the goal. That sound, "Daddy," it echoed in his mind louder than the crowd's cheers. But it wasn't just joy that followed. It was tension. Two white mothers sitting nearby exchanged a look. One leaned toward the other, whispering behind a hand, as her eyes flicked toward Terrence. A father in a baseball cap moved closer to his wife, subtly stepping in front of her. Another woman took out her phone, not to record her child, but to dial. Terrence saw it. All of it. He'd seen those looks in countries halfway across the world. Fear cloaked in entitlement. But never like this. Not during a kid's soccer match. Not while cheering on his own daughter. He stepped back a few feet, giving the field even more space. Hands in pockets, body language open. But the glances didn't. Ava scored a goal. The crowd clapped, but it was faint near him, as if his presence had drained the excitement from their applause. She looked back at him, beaming. He gave her a nod, proud, steady. Then, two police officers walked onto the grass. Their approach was unhurried but deliberate, like a practiced routine. One spoke into his shoulder radio while scanning the crowd. The other locked eyes with Terrence, lips already pursing. Terrence didn't move. He didn't need to. He already knew. The officer gestured. "Sir, can we talk to you for a second?" Conversations on the sidelines stopped mid-sentence. All eyes turned. Some pretended to watch the game, but their heads turned slowly, undeniably. Children glanced over, confused. Coaches paused their yelling. Terrence blinked once, his expression unreadable. "About what?" "We got a report of a suspicious individual watching children. We just need to confirm your identity," the officer said, voice clipped and firm. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. That's what they expected. That's what would validate their fear. "I'm Commander Terrence Willis," he said plainly. "I'm here for my daughter, number 7, Ava." The second officer looked unsure for a split second, but the first wasn't backing down. "We're gonna need you to step off the property while we sort this out, sir." He could hear Ava calling for him again. "Daddy?" Her voice was cracking now. "I have every right to be here," Terrence said, not moving. "This is a public park." The first officer's posture stiffened. "Step aside now, sir, or we'll have to escort you." And just like that, without shouting, without violence, the humiliation began. One officer walked behind Terrence. The other gestured for him to move. And he did, quietly, deliberately. He walked 2 steps ahead of the officers, away from the field, toward the parking lot. Eva ran toward the rope divider, tears welling in her eyes. "That's my dad. Why are they taking my dad?" Terrence turned once to look at her. His sunglasses hid the flicker in his eyes, but his jaw tightened. He gave her the same nod, steady, calm, military-grade control. Mothers shielded their kids' eyes. Fathers whispered things like, "It's probably a misunderstanding, or better safe than sorry." But their tones weren't concerned. They were satisfied. The threat had been neutralized. The sideline was safe again. But Ava had already done something no one saw. With trembling fingers, she hit record on her phone the moment the police arrived. She captured everything: her dad being surrounded, the officer's tone, the crowd's silence, and her own desperate pleas. Her young voice cracked on video, sobbing, "He's not dangerous. He's my dad." Terrence stood outside the rope now, beside the patrol car. The officers kept talking, asking for ID, looking at their tablets. He gave them nothing more than what they already had. When they finally left him alone, no arrest, no apology, just a dismissive "you can go now." Terrence didn't walk back to the field. He didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't protest. He walked to the far end of the parking lot, where no one could hear him. Then he took out his phone. He scrolled past a dozen names, stopped at one marked only AS Ops, and pressed call. A few rings, then a voice. "Commander," Terrence spoke calmly. "I need a favor. Discreet but public. I'll explain later. But it needs to happen fast." There was a long pause on the line. Then the voice simply replied, "Understood." Terrence ended the call. The camera of Ava's phone caught the wind pushing against her father's jacket as he walked away, alone, proud, and no longer silent. And high above them, just beyond the field's horizon, the faint hum of rotors began to form in the distance. As Terrence walked away from the field, phone still in hand, the sky above rumbled faintly. A Navy helicopter was already in the air, headed toward Darlington. The wind over Darlington Park stirred leaves along the chain-link fences, but Terrence's world was already miles away, buried in memory. As the hum of the approaching helicopter pulsed in the distance, so did the echo of another life, another boy, one who knew that silence could be louder than screams. Terrence Willis was born in a town smaller and poorer than Darlington, just outside Meridian, Mississippi. It was a place where the roads cracked like broken promises and black families were stacked in the same weather-worn houses that their grandparents had once mopped for white families. He grew up in a two-bedroom house that always smelled like pine cleaner and factory grease. His mother, Marilyn, worked night shifts as a school janitor. His father, Ernest, punched a clock at a textile plant that paid just enough to keep food on the table and dreams out of reach. Terrence was 6 when he first learned what color meant in America. He'd wandered into a diner with his father after school, craving one of those thick peanut butter milkshakes he'd heard about. But the waitress had stopped mid-step, her eyes flicking from his dark skin to the whites-only plaque, still nailed behind the register, like a family heirloom. "We'll eat at home," his father had said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. No protest, no anger, just resignation. But Terrence had looked back at that plaque long enough for it to etch itself into his mind forever. By the time he was 16, his rage was quiet, but deep-rooted. Books became weapons. He read military biographies, war tactics, and philosophy. He studied at a rusted desk in the local library, usually alone. The librarians, mostly white, never kicked him out. But they never smiled, either. When he was 18, he signed the Navy enlistment papers with a ballpoint pen his mother had stolen from the school, where she cleaned. She cried, not because he was leaving, but because she feared the uniform wouldn't protect him from the same injustice that plagued his life without it. Basic training sharpened him. He rose faster than most, not just because of skill, but because he made people feel safe, calm, controlled, disciplined. It was ironic he had grown up in a place where white people flinched when he passed. Now they leaned on him in crisis. He was 24 when he became the youngest black helicopter pilot in his unit. By 29, he was promoted to squadron leader, commanding men older than him, and saluted by soldiers who had never taken orders from a black officer before. It wasn't easy. In those years, the racism wasn't always shouted. Sometimes it was hidden in paperwork delays. Sometimes in promotions that weren't quite ready. Sometimes it was in the way fellow officers stared at him when he boarded with them on a military flight, as if he'd wandered onto the wrong aircraft. But he earned his respect the only way the military truly understood: performance. Then came the mission. Afghanistan, Kandahar province. 7 Marines were pinned down in a dry riverbed, under fire from insurgents. Terrence had been leading a supply run when the distress call crackled through. 2 other helicopters turned back due to wind conditions and fire risk. Terrence didn't. He flew in low tree level, dodging heat trails and smoke plumes, landed on uneven terrain, carried 2 Marines to the chopper himself, lifted off under a hailstorm of bullets that nicked the tail rotor and shredded his side panel. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation called him unshakable under pressure, but the press never mentioned he was black. He didn't care, or so he told himself. What he did care about was the feeling that, even after all that, he could still walk into a soccer field as a father and be treated like a criminal. That was the shift. It wasn't that he hadn't experienced racism. He had often, but never like this. Not in a space where he wasn't Commander Willis. Just Terrence. Just Ava's dad. Not while his daughter watched him be erased in real time. That moment outside the soccer field wasn't the first time someone looked at him and saw a threat, but it was the first time his little girl saw it happen. And that made it something different. Something irreversible. He had spent his entire life walking the line between deference and pride. He had bowed when expected, spoken softly when questioned, straightened his back when threatened. But as he watched Ava's wide, tearful eyes from across that soccer field, he felt something inside him break, not loud or violent, but final. He would not walk away from this one. Not silently. And that's why he made the call. The number belonged to Admiral Shepard, a friend from his early pilot days, now stationed inside a classified Pentagon operations unit. They hadn't spoken in years, but trust like theirs didn't expire, especially not between veterans who'd seen the same dirt, the same blood, the same skies. When Admiral Shepard answered, Terrence didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need visibility," Terrence had said. "I need the sky to remind them who they just disrespected." There was a long silence on the other end. The Admiral understood immediately. Terrence hadn't asked for a favor in years, and this wasn't one of those casual "can you help me" requests. This was a statement, a reckoning. Shepard didn't ask for details. "We'll handle it," he said. "The Navy doesn't forget its own." By nightfall, an internal request had been submitted to a lesser-known unit, known as NAVCOM 7, a squadron trained in civil military response demonstrations. It was used for tributes, parades, and sometimes political optics. But this time, it would be used for something else entirely. A message. The file was coded under a temporary name, Operation Visibility. Clearance was granted. The chain of command reviewed and approved it. No official statement would accompany it. It would happen quietly, but publicly. The Navy wasn't about to admit its role in what would become a national moment. But it would be there. It would be undeniable. Back in Darlington, Terrence sat alone in the den. Ava had fallen asleep in her room, clutching her phone. Lena, his wife, had sat beside him for hours, silently holding his hand. He hadn't said much, just stared at the news. The footage was already online. Eva's sobbing voice had gone viral in under 5 hours. The title under the trending video read, "Black Navy Commander Treated Like a Threat at Daughter's Soccer Game." It had 4.2 million views. He watched himself on screen, calm, still, stoic, as police cornered him like a trespasser. He looked like a man who had endured 1,000 storms but was finally soaked. That's when he saw something new, something he hadn't noticed live. In the background of the footage, just barely audible, was the faint cheer of a white parent, as Ava's goal went in, interrupted by a chuckle, and a murmured, "Well, guess that one's going back to the hood now." He replayed it twice, 3 times. There it was. Proof not just of fear but disdain. Disgust. They hadn't just thought he didn't belong. They needed him gone. Terrence leaned forward. Elbows on knees, spine stiff. Not military posture, father posture. The kind that only comes when silence must become strategy. He opened his laptop. He began typing. Not a complaint, not a statement, but a list. A plan. He wasn't done. At that very moment, in a windowless room inside the Pentagon, a blinking red notification appeared on a secure screen. Operation Visibility. Approved. ETA, 0900 hours. Darlington airspace. The morning after the soccer game, the silence in the Willis home was fragile. The kind that stretches over wounded places and tries to pretend they aren't bleeding. Sunlight broke through the blinds like a spotlight nobody asked for. In her room, Ava lay curled up, her phone pressed against her chest like a lifeline. She hadn't slept. Her tiny fingers trembled the night before as she edited the video, cutting nothing, just stitching the raw footage together. It captured everything. Her father standing tall, quiet, steady, the police flanking him with calculated formality, The way he said, "I'm here for my daughter, number 7. The hollow silence from the crowd, her own voice cracking into sobs. And at the center of it all, the injustice. So mundane, so expected, so casual, it stung more than any slur ever could. She typed a caption slowly, carefully. "My dad, a hero, kicked out for being black." She hesitated before pressing post. Then she hit share. By dawn, the video had 400,000 views. By noon, it passed 2 million. And then it exploded. Twitter latched on next. Then YouTube creators started dissecting it. Journalists started reaching out. Strangers flooded the comments. "This man risked his life for this country, and this is how we treat him." The girl's voice cracked my soul. "Tell me again how racism is a thing of the past." By the time Ava checked her notifications again, the hashtags were trending. Soccer while black. Commander Willis. This is America. The names of the officers weren't known yet, but the town, the school, and the soccer league had already been identified. Amateur sleuths had tracked the location by the background signage and cross-referenced it with local sports schedules, and they were angry. News crews started calling the school, then the Darlington Police Department, then the mayor's office. Darlington wasn't ready. The town's official response came 24 hours later. A cold 3-sentence statement posted to their Facebook page. The Darlington police responded to a citizen's report during a youth soccer game. Officers followed standard protocol. The matter is under internal review. That only fueled the fire. National anchors from CNN to MSNBC debated it on live TV. Even Fox News weighed in, predictably framing Terrence's calm refusal to leave as a potential provocation. But the real war wasn't on cable. It was online. A 14-second clip of Ava crying at the rope line became the center of it all. Dozens of creators used it in reaction videos. Civil rights attorneys shared it with commentary. Activists dissected every frame. It wasn't just about one man and one field anymore. It was about a country too used to watching black dignity get policed in real time. And Ava, quiet, grieving, was suddenly everywhere. Her school inbox flooded with media requests. Her Instagram gained 200,000 followers overnight. Teenagers DM'd her from across the country, telling her about their own parents being followed, questioned, or embarrassed in public. Some messaged just to say thank you. But not everyone was supportive. At school, the mood was split. Some white parents told their kids to keep their heads down and stay out of it. Eva's friends became cautious. One even unfollowed her on every platform. A boy she had known since 3rd grade posted, "Maybe if he didn't act like he owned the field." Ava didn't respond, but she saw it, and it stung. At home, Terrence watched it all unfold, with the same controlled poise that had carried him through firefights and diplomatic missions. But this was different. This wasn't a war zone. This was supposed to be childhood. He stood at the kitchen counter, scrolling through thousands of messages, watching his daughter become the face of something much bigger than their family. Lena, his wife, was the only one who cracked. "He held it together," she whispered, gripping the edge of the counter. "He always holds it together. And now they're turning it into a political debate?" She had spent years hiding her fury beneath politeness, nodding in grocery stores when people touched Ava's curls without asking, apologizing when Terrence's voice carried too far in restaurants, never daring to look indignant. But not this time. She began collecting information. Public records. Complaints against the Darlington PD. School board minutes. Lena, the former law student who had left her dreams to support a military family, had dusted off her fire. The town's racist underbelly, long whispered about in back rooms and church basements, began surfacing. Ava's video pulled up old scars. A 206 case of a black high school football player suspended for intimidating behavior after celebrating a touchdown, his arms raised for less than 2 seconds. A 2012 lawsuit quietly dropped after a black parent was barred from volunteering at a PTA event. A former black teacher anonymously revealed that he was given a quiet push-out after raising concerns about curriculum bias. Now, the entire town was under the microscope. Some residents pushed back, claiming Ava's video was one-sided. Others doubled down in support of the Willis family. The community fractured. And yet through it all, Terrence remained unrateable, watching his daughter rise in the public eye, knowing full well the cost that might follow. One evening, just after sunset, Ava sat across from her father on the porch. She was still in her school hoodie, her phone clutched in both hands. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked, eyes wide, almost afraid. Terrence didn't answer right away. He looked past her, into the darkness beyond the front yard. Then he looked at her fully. "You told the truth," he said quietly. "There's nothing more right than that." She nodded slowly. But a shadow of uncertainty lingered in her chest. The truth, she was learning, wasn't always safe. Then the phone rang. It wasn't Ava's this time. It was Terrence's private line, a number only a few dozen people in the world had. He answered. The voice on the other end was gravel and command. "Commander Willis?" Terrence straightened slightly. "Speaking. This is Admiral Vincent. Retired, but I still have friends in places that matter." The man's voice was old-school Navy, direct, unyielding. Terrence remained silent, waiting. "We saw the video," the Admiral said. "Some of us served with you. Some of us remember what you did in Kandahar." A long pause. "We're not letting this go." Terrence's grip tightened slightly on the phone. Ava looked up, unsure what was happening, her father's expression suddenly unreadable. "You'll be hearing from us," the Admiral added. "And so will the rest of the country." Moments after Terrence hangs up, Lena bursts onto the porch holding a printed screenshot. Her voice is tight, urgent. "You need to see this. Someone from the mayor's office just leaked an internal memo. They're planning to paint you as a security threat." Lena stood on the porch with the printout still trembling in her hand. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and fury. The memo had come from a former city clerk, an anonymous email with no signature, just the subject line, "For your husband's safety." She and Terrence read it together under the porch light, the air thick with silent tension. The document outlined a proposed media strategy, crafted by Darlington's communications team, to subtly label Terrence as a security concern due to his assertive behavior during law enforcement engagement. Carefully worded, legally safe, morally venomous. Terrence set the memo down slowly, his jaw unmoving. His eyes, though, darkened. "They want to rewrite the footage," Lena said. "They're going to turn your calm into a threat." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The damage wasn't in what the town would say. It was in knowing they had always been ready to say it. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. Ava lay curled up in bed, headphones on, unaware of how close the town had come to rewriting her father's identity. Lena stayed downstairs at the kitchen table, laptop open, coffee untouched. Her training kicked in. She might not have practiced law, but she remembered every course, every clause. If the town wanted to wage war through paperwork and reputation, she'd come armed. She began researching Darlington's public records. What she found wasn't just troubling. It was surgical. Over the past 15 years, nearly 94% of city contracts for infrastructure, security, and school improvements had gone to white-owned businesses. Even though the town's black population made up nearly black-owned firms that submitted bids were often rejected with vague language, like non-competitive, incomplete scope, or non-local advantage, even when their bids were lower. And then she saw it. The soccer field. The field that now symbolized her husband's humiliation had been funded through a federal community recreation grant, money specifically earmarked for equitable access in underserved communities. The grant included a clause requiring racial equity in access, use, and representation. But the field's gate policy, volunteer rotation, and even snack bar schedules reflected a different reality. Lena cross-checked names. Of the 36 volunteers who served as field coordinators last season, 35 were white. The one black volunteer was assigned only Monday practices, lowest attendance, and no game. Even the youth team rosters reflected imbalance. While the school's demographic split hovered around 60-40 white to black students, over 85% of registered players on the soccer team were white. Black families had begun withdrawing their children from the league quietly, citing unwelcoming vibes or disciplinary bias. It wasn't statistical error. It was engineered exclusion, too polite to protest, too embedded to prosecute. Lena leaned back in her chair, her chest rising and falling in long, slow waves. Then she remembered a story. 3 years ago, a local news blurb mentioned a black teen named Darius Kimbrough. His name had only come up once, a brief scandal about inappropriate behavior during a high school football game. The story disappeared quickly. Darius had transferred schools, no official charges were filed. But Lena remembered the look in his mother's eyes on the night of the incident. While local media waited for a police report, she had clutched her son's hand with the desperate firmness of someone trying to keep their child's life from slipping away. Lena searched for Darius and found him on LinkedIn. Now a junior at a state college, She messaged him hesitantly. Within minutes he replied. He remembered everything. He told her about the night he'd been accused of verbal aggression on the field. How a white player had called him a slur and shoved him after the whistle. Darius pushed back. Reflex, not malice, and was immediately pulled from the game and banned from the team for the rest of the season. I didn't even get to explain. He wrote. My mom begged them not to make it worse. Said it was better to just let it go. The coach had refused to comment, and the school labeled it an internal matter. The town forgot it. The family didn't. Lena stared at the screen, every part of her rigid with silent outrage. This wasn't a town that had made a mistake with Terrence. It was a town that had been waiting to justify its patterns. When she told Terrence the next morning, his reaction wasn't loud, but something changed in his eyes. A new kind of stillness. Not defeat, calculation. I need to see the town charter, he said, and the federal conditions tied to that soccer field grant. Lena pulled the documents within hours. The federal language was clear. The field could not be used in any way that disproportionately excluded marginalized groups. Violations meant audits. Audits meant federal scrutiny. That's when she looked deeper into the town's legal archives. Most of the records were digital, but older files, sealed court cases, and unindexed materials were stored on microfilm at the Darlington Public Records Office. She walked in with a tote bag and a resolve that reminded her of who she used to be before diapers and deployments. She requested reels from 1994 to 2002, and then she found it. A case number, DCR 96, filed by the late Charles W. Leonard, a black business owner who once ran a construction firm just 2 miles from the soccer complex. The case alleged systemic exclusion of black contractors from city-funded projects, specifically citing racial bias in the town's bidding process. Leonard had submitted bids for 3 consecutive projects, all lower than the winning white-owned firms. His lawsuit cited civil rights violations, contract fraud, and misuse of federal grant funds. The case never went to trial. It had been settled sealed quietly, with no media mention. The payout was classified as administrative redirection, a bureaucratic term that buried the truth under paperwork. Leonard's business closed 3 months later. He died within the year. His obituary didn't even mention the case. Lena's hand trembled as she printed the microfilm copy. The names of city officials in the case were still in office today. The very people now trying to label her husband as dangerous had once been sued for institutionalized racial bias. They had survived the scandal by making sure no one ever knew it happened. This wasn't a town with a bad moment. This was a town built on bad moments, stacked neatly under silence and sealed files. Lena drove home in silence, the printout clutched in the passenger seat like evidence from a crime scene. Her stomach twisted with anticipation, fear, and a resolve she hadn't felt since Ava was born. When she handed the file to Terrence, he didn't say anything at first. He read every line, slowly, carefully, and then he whispered, "They erased him." Lena nodded. "But they won't erase you." Terrence looked out the window at the same field that had humiliated him days ago. The field that had risen from a foundation of lies, buried lawsuits, and polished exclusion. He knew now what had to be done. Not just for Ava, not just for himself, for every black family who had been gaslit into silence, for every lawsuit sealed, for every contract denied, for every cheer silenced because it came from the wrong voice. He turned back to Lena. "We go public," he said, "with everything." That night, as Terrence prepares his first public statement, Lena's phone buzzes. It's an email from an unknown address. The subject line reads, "Stop digging or your family will suffer like Leonard's did." The morning after the anonymous threat landed in Lena's inbox, Terrence stood at the edge of his daughter's bed, watching her breathe. Eva was still lost in sleep. Her hair twisted around her cheek like a question mark. Her innocence, once guarded by every protocol he had memorized as a naval officer, now felt fragile against the brutality of public silence. Downstairs, Lena was already awake, her eyes bloodshot, clutching her coffee like armor. She had reread the email a dozen times, each word a brick in the rising wall of fear. "Stop digging, or your family will suffer like Leonard's did." They hadn't signed it. They hadn't needed to. Terrence didn't call the police. He didn't trust the local force to investigate themselves. Instead, he did what the Navy trained him to do: strategize under pressure. He made 3 calls that morning, one to Admiral Shepard, one to a former Pentagon press liaison, and one to a lawyer named Valerie Knox, a civil rights specialist, known for making racists very uncomfortable, in courtroom. By noon, Valerie was in their living room, flipping through Lena's findings and muttering, "Jesus. This isn't negligence. This is generational erasure." Terrence listened, arms folded, still unreadable. Valerie looked up from the sealed court documents. "They'll try to handle this quietly, spin it, offer you some polished apology, or a diversity training seminar. They'll want a clean ending." "I don't want clean," Terrence said, voice even. "I want honest." Valerie leaned forward. "That means going public. No edits. Full truth. Are you ready for what that really means?" Terrence didn't flinch. "My daughter watched them erase me in real time. I owe it to her not to disappear again." That afternoon, the Pentagon liaison sent over a draft of a potential public statement. It was exactly what Terrence expected: measured language, vague phrasing, heavy with diplomatic restraint. It began with Commander Willis remains a valued veteran, whose recent experience in Darlington highlights the importance of continued community dialogue. He read it once, then placed it face down on the coffee table. "No," he said. "What do you mean?" Lena asked gently. "I mean, I'm not playing diplomat anymore. I've saluted enough systems that let racism hide behind protocol. I won't be their polite prop." Instead, he crafted his own speech. One line at a time. No euphemisms. No diluted metaphors. That Sunday, he stood in front of a black congregation at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Richmond. He wore no uniform, no medals, just a dark blazer over a navy shirt, sleeves rolled. The room was packed. Cameras recorded from the pews. News vans waited outside. Ava and Lena sat in the front row, eyes locked on him. Terrence stepped to the pulpit, his voice quiet at first. "I flew helicopters into war zones. I brought back wounded Marines under enemy fire. I've worn this country's flag on my chest while bullets tore through my aircraft. But none of that mattered when I stood on a soccer field as a black father." The room went silent. They didn't see a commander. They didn't see a veteran. They saw what this country has always seen first. "My skin." Murmurs rippled across the pews. Half grief, half fury. "I didn't come here to demand respect. I came to tell the truth. Because I've realized something. Racism doesn't need to scream anymore. It just needs to whisper in policy, in paperwork, in playgrounds." The applause broke like a wave. After the service, people waited in line to speak to him. Elders wept. Teenagers asked for selfies. Parents thanked him for saying what they'd always been too afraid to say aloud. Word spread fast. Within days, Terrence was invited to speak at 3 more churches, 2 high schools, and a college symposium. Everywhere he went, he didn't speak about the Navy. He spoke about the silence that swallows black dignity in polite communities. He told Ava's story, but he wove in every Darius, every Leonard, every kid who was made to feel like a problem for existing. But the more he spoke, the more the backlash sharpened. The Darlington School Board released a statement questioning Ava's interpretation of events. A local radio host called Terrence an attention seeker dressed in uniform. Anonymous tips began to surface, claims that Terrence had a disciplinary infraction on base, which was false, that Ava had been suspended in school once, also false, that Lena had falsified documents for her job, blatantly false. They were trying to drown them in whispers. Then came the real escalation. Lena was followed home. It happened late one night. After picking Ava up from a friend's house, a dark SUV appeared in her rearview mirror and stayed there for 6 blocks. She turned left twice, then circled her neighborhood. The SUV stayed. When she parked in their driveway, it paused across the street, headlights off, watching. Terrence was already outside when she stepped out. He had seen the same SUV at the edge of the church parking lot earlier that week. He walked out calmly, pulled his phone from his pocket, and raised it toward the car. The SUV reversed and disappeared into the night. They changed their locks the next day, installed cameras. Ava wasn't allowed to walk anywhere alone anymore. Valerie Knox sent a formal warning to the Darlington city attorney. Any harm that comes to the Willis family will be treated as obstruction of civil rights. We are watching. But the message wasn't just legal. It was strategic. Terrence understood something now. This wasn't just about racism in Darlington. This was about how institutions insulated themselves from accountability. He no longer saw himself as a victim. He saw himself as a disruptor. That's when the unexpected call came in. Admiral Shepard again. Voice more clipped this time. "We've been watching everything," he said. "You've moved people, Terrence. This is bigger than you now. Terrence waited. Shepard wasn't a man prone to theatrics. There's a request from Navcom 7. The Admiral continued. They want to show support. No statements. Just presence. Terrence's brow furrowed. What kind of presence? Shepard's voice didn't waver. They're offering a low flyover. Full squadron. Darlington airspace. Sunday morning. Terrence's breath caught, not from fear, but from the symbolic weight of it. They want to remind people, Shepard added, that a black commander isn't a threat. He's a force. Terrence didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the soccer field in the distance, still so clean, so polished, so dishonest. He thought about Ava's face, Lena's silence, Leonard's sealed file, the SUV in the dark. Then he said softly, let them fly. That evening, as Terrence steps outside to clear his thoughts, a letter is taped to their mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside is a single typed line. If that helicopter touches our sky, we'll light your name on fire. The wind over Darlington Park was calm that Saturday morning, but the air felt electric. Spectators filed in with folding chairs and thermoses, pretending this was just another youth soccer match. But something in their posture betrayed them. Stiffer backs, darting glances, quiet murmurs beneath the bleachers. Everyone knew something was coming. The rumor had spread like smoke in dry grass. Some said a military flyover was planned. Others claimed Terrence Willis was returning with the media in tow. A few said he was bringing lawyers. Most dismissed it as drama, but still they came. Not to cheer, but to witness. At exactly 10:06 a.m., the sound hit first deep, resonant, not the commercial buzz of a passing plane, but a rolling thunder that seemed to vibrate the very sky. People looked up. A child pointed. There it was. A Navy MH-60 Seahawk helicopter burst over the horizon, descending with deliberate elegance, slicing through the clouds like a blade. Its sleek, matte gray body shimmered in the sun. On its side, two decals flashed in sequence, the Navy insignia, and below it, the words, CDRT Willis, Valor Flight. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some stood, unsure whether to applaud or duck. Others reached for their phones. The helicopter slowed as it approached the field, tilting slightly as if bowing toward the earth. Then, from the external speaker system, a voice echoed down like thunder laced in dignity. Commander Terrence Willis, United States Navy, Distinguished Flying Cross, Kandahar Rescue, 15 years of honorable service. The rotors beat the grass flat with each turn. Sweat formed on foreheads. Silence reigned. The voice continued. Present today, as a father, as a citizen, as a man with every right to stand where he chooses. This field belongs to all. Some parents squinted, unsure how to interpret what they were hearing. Others shifted uncomfortably, gripping the hands of their children. No one spoke. No one moved. The helicopter held its position, hovering, humming, watching. Then, from the edge of the parking lot, Terrence emerged. He wasn't in uniform, just dark slacks, a clean white shirt, and the wind at his back. Eva walked beside him, her small hand locked into his. She wore her number 7 jersey, black armband wrapped just above the elbow. As they approached the field, the crowd parted, not out of invitation, but from the sheer force of certainty that moved with them. Eva's cleats tapped against the gravel, each step a soft defiance. They reached the rope divider. No one said a word. A referee stepped forward hesitantly, whistle clenched in nervous fingers. But he didn't speak. He simply looked at Terrence and lowered his eyes. Terrence lifted the rope gently, and Eva ducked under it. He followed. On the other side, Eva turned to face the bleachers, her father behind her. The same girl who had once cried as police led her dad away, now stood tall, chin up, eyes sharp. A coach from the opposing team walked slowly toward them. He opened his mouth to speak, but then he stopped. The noise overhead shifted. A second helicopter joined the first, hovering just behind it, creating a duet of authority and warning. The coach backed away. Eva stepped to midfield. Her teammates, initially frozen, followed one by one. The match resumed, but the crowd remained silent. Every kick, every pass played out beneath the roar of righteous history. Media crews lined the fences. National anchors broadcast live from the park entrance. A black camerawoman wept openly as her lens zoomed in on Eva, arms outstretched, intercepting the ball. Terrence didn't yell. He didn't wave. He simply stood, watching. His presence was louder than any protest. At halftime, the helicopters slowly retreated, circling once above the field before fading toward the horizon. The silence that followed wasn't emptiness, it was reverence. Terrence stepped forward then, nodding once to the media, waiting by the gate. The press surged. Microphones lifted. Questions exploded. What message are you sending with the flyover? Do you think this changes anything? Commander Willis, do you plan legal action? He paused, waiting for them to settle. Then he spoke not into the microphones, but straight into the air, as if speaking to history itself. My name is Terrence Willis. I served this country because I believed in the ideals it promised. But this week, I watched those ideals collapse in front of my daughter. Cameras snapped. Reporters leaned forward. I was publicly removed from a public field for looking like a threat, not acting like one, not speaking like one, just existing. He turned slightly, locking eyes with the mayor, who stood just behind the press, pale and silent. They say this town isn't racist. But racism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it wears khakis and carries a clipboard. Gasps fluttered. Reporters scribbled furiously. And sometimes, Terrence continued, it hides in sealed court documents, buried contracts, and fake apologies. But we found them. My wife found them. We see them now. He raised a folder, copies of the sealed Leonard lawsuit, public contract statistics, and federal field grant violations. This is no longer a conversation, he said. It's a reckoning. Valerie Knox stepped forward then, flanked by 3 other civil rights attorneys and 2 retired veterans. We are filing a federal civil rights lawsuit against the town of Darlington, she announced. On behalf of Commander Terrence Willis, his daughter Ava, and every family who has been silently excluded from this community. The press went wild. But Terrence wasn't finished. To the children watching, he said, looking down the lens of a camera. Never let anyone erase you. Your presence is not a threat. It is power. To the crowd behind the cameras, he added. We didn't come here to divide. We came to reveal. Ava took his hand again. They stood together at midfield, the grass still flattened from the wind of justice. A quiet applause began, not from the bleachers but from the far corner of the field. A small group of black veterans had gathered there, hands over hearts, eyes unblinking. Then one began to sing. Softly at first, lift every voice and sing. More joined in. And more. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't planned. It was ancestral. Terrence stood still, holding Ava's hand tighter, as voices rose into the air where the helicopters had just flown. History had come full circle, and it was singing. Just as the last note faded, Valerie's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then looked up, eyes wide. Terrence. The DOJ just opened an investigation. Civil Rights Division. Darlington is officially on the map. By Sunday night, Darlington was no longer just a small town in Virginia. It was a symbol, a flashpoint, a national mirror. The images of a Navy helicopter hovering over a youth soccer game were everywhere, on CNN, in Twitter threads, spliced into TikTok explainers, even etched into editorial cartoons. News anchors split their coverage down ideological fault lines. On MSNBC, Terrence Willis was hailed as a modern-day Frederick Douglass in a flight suit. On Fox News, commentators barked that the Navy had set a dangerous precedent by intervening in a local parenting issue. One host smirked into the camera. Is this about justice, or just a very loud father with a very bruised ego? The word hero echoed in half the headlines. The phrase milking victimhood echoed in the rest. Online debates flared into digital wildfires. Comment sections became minefields. People who had never heard of Darlington suddenly spoke of it like they'd lived there all their lives. And beneath all the noise, the real damage crept in. Quiet, targeted, personal. At Ava's school, the backlash bloomed like rot beneath a painted wall. Parents who once exchanged polite smiles in the pickup line now muttered behind tinted windows. The soccer league's Facebook group imploded, some defending Terrence's dignity, others claiming the helicopter was traumatizing to the children. One post read, "I don't care how many medals he has, this isn't Afghanistan. My 6-year-old cried because of that stunt." Another simply said, "Reverse racism is still racism. Helicopters don't belong at soccer games." Ava saw every word. She wasn't supposed to, but her classmates screenshotted them, texted them to her, laughed behind hands in hallways. Her best friend Caroline went quiet, unfollowed her on Instagram, uninvited her to a sleepover she had already packed for. Worse were the anonymous messages. Her DMs filled with everything from microaggressions to straight-up hate. Your dad's a clown in a costume. No one's scared of him. Just tired of hearing about him. Bet you can't even play without daddy watching from the sky. Lena tried to shield her, but Ava was 13. The internet had no off switch. The pain lodged in her shoulders, in her silence, in the way she stayed in her room longer each night. At school, tension thickened like smoke in a sealed room. Teachers whispered in break rooms. One guidance counselor, a black woman named Ms. Townsend, stood up in a staff meeting and said, "If you can't recognize that what happened to that man was wrong, you don't belong around children." She resigned the next day. No explanation, just a folded letter and a silence that said everything. By Tuesday, the school board issued a tone-deaf statement about maintaining neutrality and encouraging respectful conversation. But respect only went one way. Black students were pulled aside for dress code violations more often that week than in the past 3 months combined. A girl who wore a Commander Willis pin on her backpack was told to remove it because it was political. Lena watched it unfold like a slow unraveling. The truth had been exposed, but exposure didn't guarantee progress, not in Darlington. So she did what she had always done in silence. But now she did it in public. She organized. Ava watched from the staircase as Lena placed phone calls, emailed pastors, spoke to parents, printed flyers, contacted local news. The woman who once hesitated to correct a rude cashier now planned a protest march with the precision of a general. And she called it what it was, a walk of truth. Not anger, not rebellion, just truth, deliberate, undeniable, and public. The plan was simple. Hundreds of residents, marching silently from the public library to the town hall, carrying signs with nothing but facts. No chants, no speeches, just presence. Signs read, 94% of city contracts go to white businesses. Commander Willis saved lives, then got escorted off a soccer field.
Racism doesn't have to shout to do damage.
They marched in silence. The streets whispered louder than any scream. News crews followed. Police monitored but didn't interfere. Even a few white families joined, awkward at first. But their progress had to start somewhere. Lena led the march in a dark coat, her hand gripping Ava's. Valerie Knox walked beside them. And Terrence followed, at the rear, quiet, watchful, protective. He didn't need to lead the line. He had already cleared the sky. After the walk, as people dispersed and news anchors packed up their gear, something unexpected happened. The mayor approached. He was flanked by 2 aides, face pale, jaw clenched, not angry, just cornered. His town was slipping from his control, and he hated that. He waited until Lena and Ava moved out of earshot, then gently gestured for Terrence to follow him toward the building's side entrance. Inside, in a small conference room that smelled of fresh paint and old secrets, the mayor closed the door and spoke without preamble. "This has gotten out of hand," he said. "For everyone." Terrence didn't sit. The mayor cleared his throat. "Look, I'm not denying your experience. I'm just saying the town's under a microscope now. Investors are pulling out. Our tourism board is panicking. We've had 5 families threaten to leave." Terrence said nothing. His silence was precision. Let them scramble in it. The mayor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We can fix this. We issue a joint statement. Something unifying. You say the Navy's involvement was misinterpreted. The town apologizes for the misunderstanding. You fade back, quietly." Terrence raised an eyebrow. The mayor misread it as consideration. He continued, more confidently. "You'll be remembered as a man who de-escalated a national fire. You keep your legacy. The town moves on. Everyone wins." Terrence still didn't speak. So the mayor gave the offer its name. "We want this to go away, Commander. In exchange for a public apology and silence, we'll make sure your family's safe, your reputation intact, and unofficially some contracts go where they should have gone years ago." The air tightened. It wasn't just a deal. It was a bribe dipped in threat. Terrence took one step forward. His voice when it came was soft.
"You're offering to reward silence with safety?"
The mayor blinked. "No. You just did." Terrence cut in. "You've been rewarding silence for years. That's why you're here now. Because this town learned that fear keeps black voices quiet. Until mine didn't." He walked to the door. The mayor said quieter now. "I'm just trying to protect what's left." Terrence paused at the threshold. "So am I." As Terrence steps outside, Lena rushes toward him, phone in hand, her face pale. Terrence, turn on the news. They're saying Ava faked the video. The news alert struck like lightning. A conservative local station aired a breaking special report, titled Digital Deception. Did Ava Willis edit the field footage? A white former tech teacher speculated that the viral video may have been manipulated. A so-called media expert, no credentials shown, cited frame inconsistencies and possible time jumps. No evidence, just planted doubt, broadcasted national. Terrence watched in silence. Ava stood beside him, lips trembling, as her face filled the screen, looped between sobs and sound bites. I didn't fake anything, she whispered. Lena clenched her fists, voice low. They're trying to erase her like they tried to erase you. Terrence didn't respond. He stood motionless for a moment, then slowly reached for the remote and turned off the television, not in retreat, but to focus. He knew what had to happen next. No more reaction. No more waiting. It was time to speak. Not in a town hall. Not behind closed doors. Not at a school board meeting with time limits and formalities. A press conference. His terms. His truth. Word spread within hours. By the next morning, every local outlet and several national crews gathered on the front lawn of Darlington City Hall. News vans lined the block. Microphones dotted the podium like thorns. Tension coiled around the town square as residents filled in on folding chairs and curbs. Some came to support, some came to scoff, some came out of pure uncomfortable curiosity. Terrence stood behind the podium, his face unreadable, his presence commanding without effort. Ava and Lena stood to the side. Valerie Knox flanked them, holding a thick folder, the lawsuit freshly printed, freshly filed. Terrence didn't open with greetings. He didn't thank anyone for attending. He began with truth. You called my daughter a liar, he said, voice slow and surgical. You questioned the footage. You questioned our pain. So let me show you the pain you forgot to erase. He tapped the podium. An aide stepped forward, placing a small speaker beside the microphones. Terrence pressed play. Crackling audio from the 1970s spilled into the summer air. A local Darlington AM radio host, long dead but never disavowed, laughing as he referred to black residents as jungle folk, and warning white parents to keep your kids safe around certain playgrounds. The clip ended. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some older residents looked away. Some young ones looked stunned. A few began filming. Terrence pressed another button. A second clip began. This one from 1992. A town council meeting, poorly recorded, where an unnamed member casually joked, "We don't need more Section 8 apartments, unless we want midnight drum circles in the suburbs." Lena glanced at the mayor standing in the doorway behind the press line. His face was pale, his eyes down. Terrence's voice stayed steady. They say the past is the past, he said. But the past is still printed on the lease agreements that excluded black families. It's still buried in sealed court files. It's still playing in the background of every misunderstanding we're told to overlook. He gestured behind him. 6 elderly black residents slowly walked forward, aided by canes, children, and history. One by one they shared pieces of truth. Miss Thelma Jenkins, 89, told how she was denied entrance to Darlington High in 1951, redirected to a school 3 counties away. Harold Finch, a retired truck driver, spoke about being refused a home loan despite flawless credit. Marlene Dupree described her father being beaten for using the front entrance of a diner. Each story chipped away at the illusion of fairness that Darlington had so carefully cultivated. Tears filled the eyes of younger black residents. A few white teenagers, sitting at the edge of the crowd, looked at each other with silent unease. Some had grandparents on the town council. Some had believed what they were told, that racism was history, not reality. Then Terrence spoke again. I don't share these stories to shame this town. I share them to expose the silence that has built it. A silence that tried to swallow my daughter's voice, my wife's research, my identity. He turned to Valerie. She stepped forward, raising the legal documents high. This, she said, is the civil rights lawsuit filed today with the Department of Justice. On behalf of the Willis family, and every citizen in Darlington who's ever been quietly erased. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes lit the air. A few parents got up and left, muttering about being ambushed. But most stayed staring, absorbing, shifting. Terrence wasn't done. He looked into the camera. To every town watching this, he said, every school board, every soccer field, every mayor's office, that thinks racism is just a mistake to be cleaned up. We're not asking for your apology. We're asking for your accountability. He stepped back, and the silence was thunderous. Until the applause came. It started slow, then grew, not frenzied, but firm. Not polite, but powerful. It came from the back, where the black family stood, and moved forward. Even some white residents, especially the young, joined in. Not all, but enough to mark the beginning of something undeniable. The mayor didn't speak that day. He returned to his office, visibly shaken, chased by reporters he refused to face. That night, Ava slept soundly for the first time in a week. Terrence sat beside her, quietly watching the rise and fall of her breathing. Lena stood in the doorway, a small smile on her lips. "You didn't just protect her," she said. "You changed what she'll remember." But history wasn't done yet. At 3:18 a.m., Lena's phone buzzed. A new message. No name. Just a subject line. "You need to see this before it disappears again." Attached was a scanned PDF. High resolution, grainy at the edges. A memo dated night, handwritten notes in the margins. And a header that read, Darlington Municipal Planning Committee. Internal correspondence. Subject: strategies for containing minority population growth. She scrolled further, eyes widening. Bullet points listed coded strategies, zoning laws, permit delays, rental caps, and community maintenance policies. One line was underlined in red ink. Ensure key contracts and leadership positions remain within trusted demographic circles. Another, subtle, not confrontational. Maintain plausible deniability at all costs. Lena's fingers shook. She looked over at Terrence, then back at the screen. This wasn't just old racism. This was orchestrated racism. Documented, circulated, and hidden in plain sight. Just as Lena forwards the memo to Valerie, her laptop screen flickers. A new email appears, this time from the same anonymous sender, one sentence only. "This isn't the only one. They buried over 200 files. I'll send more, but you're not safe." Eva Willis had always been the quiet type, observant, thoughtful, a shadow that noticed everything but rarely stepped into the light. But silence had failed her. It hadn't protected her dad, it hadn't stopped the lies, and it hadn't saved her from watching the truth get twisted on a national stage. So she stopped waiting for adults to fix it. One evening, curled in her bedroom beneath the warmth of protest signs and childhood posters, Ava opened the voice recorder app on her phone. Her hands trembled, not with fear but with conviction, trying to find a home. She pressed record. "Hi, I'm Ava Willis," she began, her voice cracking slightly. "You probably know me as the girl from the soccer video. But this isn't about that day, it's about every day before it, and the days that followed." She paused, breath held. "This is Sidelines, a podcast where we talk about the stories people ignore. Stories from black kids who were benched, silenced, overlooked, or punished for just showing up." That night she edited her voice under a piano instrumental, soft but haunting, then uploaded the file to a free podcasting platform. She didn't expect much, just needed to release something real into a world full of noise. But the next morning, she woke up to 12,000 plays. By the end of the week, 300. By the following, 2.4 million. Episode 1 had been reposted on Twitter by social justice educators, youth advocates, and a retired WNBA player who added, "This kid is sharper than half the media." Episode 2 dropped days later. An interview with Darius Kimbrough, the college student falsely accused in Darlington's high school football scandal. His voice wavered but didn't break. He spoke about how one false push, one angry coach, and one silent school board nearly ruined his future. The internet responded like wildfire. Black teens from Georgia to Illinois sent Ava voice memos. Some shared stories of being benched for hairstyles. Others talked about being labeled aggressive, for calling out a missed foul. One girl wept while describing how her coach banned her from wearing a BLM armband. Ava listened to every message. She edited carefully, removing background noise but leaving in the stutters, the tears, the long silences. She wanted the truth raw, uncomfortable, unmissable. By the time episode 5 dropped, entitled "We Showed Up, They Shut Us Down," the podcast hit national rankings, and then a message came in that changed everything. It wasn't from a parent, or a coach, or even a reporter. It was from LeBron James. He had tweeted a link to Sidelines with 3 words, "She's not playing."
The post exploded. Retweets, think pieces, invitations.
Ava's name was suddenly on every screen. Radio stations played clips from her show between music sets. College journalism programs began emailing her parents with early enrollment offers, even though she was still in middle school. Terrence sat in the kitchen, staring at one such offer from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. Lena read it aloud again, unable to contain her tears. She hasn't even had her first school dance, Lena whispered. Terrence smiled faintly. She's having her revolution instead. But Ava wasn't chasing attention. She was chasing impact. As sidelines gained momentum, sponsors quietly began pulling funding from Darlington's youth programs. One soccer equipment supplier severed ties, citing a values mismatch. A state-level athletic council launched an independent review of the town's sports inclusivity practices. College scouts, once loyal to Darlington's elite teams, began to question their recruitment data. Patterns emerged: black players underrepresented in highlight reels, white athletes praised for leadership, while black ones were commended for athleticism, but not strategy or vision. Darlington's sports legacy was under a magnifying glass, and Ava was holding it. At school, tension burned hotter than ever. A group of white parents lobbied to have her podcast monitored for political messaging. They failed, but not before several tried to intimidate her teachers into discouraging her platform. It backfired. Miss Carter, Ava's English teacher, created a youth voice unit centered around sidelines. Students wrote essays about injustice in their own lives. One boy admitted he had never noticed how his team always put the only black player in defense. Never midfield, never captain. Awareness bloomed in cracks too deep to cover anymore. And through it all, Ava stayed focused. She didn't look for praise. She looked for the next story. She recorded in her closet with a mic her father bought her from a local tech shop. She edited between homework and soccer practice. She rarely smiled on air. But when she did, it was earned. Deep. Terrence, watching her from a distance, felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in weeks. Hope. Not the kind written in law or promised by courts, but the kind that lives in voices refusing to go quiet. Then came the invitation. It arrived by email. Official, brief, and so surreal Lena thought it was spam. The subject line read, White House Youth Policy Briefing. Speaker request, Ava Willis. The message was real. The offer was clear. Ava had been selected to speak during a youth roundtable at the White House, an event focused on civic engagement, education equity, and youth-driven activism. Her podcast was cited directly as a nationally relevant platform for overlooked voices. The moment the email was read aloud in the kitchen, Ava dropped her fork. Her eyes widened, mouth slightly open. I don't have anything to wear to the White House, she whispered. Terrence reached out, his palm resting on her shoulder. You've been dressing the truth every day, baby girl, he said. That's more powerful than any suit. The family gathered that night in the living room, staring at the screen in stunned, joyful silence. But as they began to plan booking flights, confirming permissions, a new email came in, this time to Ava's podcast account. It was short. No subject line, no name. Just a sentence. We know where your plane lands. Stay grounded. Lena froze. Terrence leaned in, his jaw clenched, but he didn't panic. He stood, walked over to a locked drawer in his study, and opened it. Inside were 3 files labeled Emergency Protocol. Time to call Shepard, he said quietly. No one's threatening my daughter's voice. Not now. Not ever. As the family prepares for Washington, a knock sounds at their front door. Ava opens it to find a plain envelope on the porch. Inside is a flash drive labeled Darlington's Shadow Files. Do not trust anyone. The flash drive sat like a loaded gun on the kitchen table. Terrence stared at it, jaw tight, while Lena read the label again under her breath. Darlington's Shadow Files. Do not trust anyone. Eva stood between them, arms folded, trying to look brave, but her eyes couldn't hide it. She was scared, and not the kind of scared that came from playground bullying or online trolling. This was deeper, sharper, real. Terrence inserted the drive into his encrypted laptop and opened the folder. Inside were dozens of PDFs, audio files, and a spreadsheet titled D-Legacy Network. It took only minutes to confirm what they feared. This wasn't just about racism buried in city policy. This was a live operation, a coordinated militia of concerned citizens who believed Darlington was losing its identity. They referred to themselves as the Preservers. Their mission: protect the town's cultural integrity from outside disruption. Code for white supremacy. dressed in local pride. Some files listed target names. Ava's name appeared 3 times. Lena's was there too, next to an eerie bullet point. Keeps digging. Watch closely. One document mentioned Operation Marchback, a planned public demonstration by the preservers, set to occur the same week as Darlington's annual MLK Day celebration. Terrence called Valerie, who immediately contacted federal authorities. The FBI responded within the hour. An agent named Darnell Hughes, black, tall, professional, and visibly unsettled, arrived at their doorstep in an unmarked vehicle. He reviewed the flash drive and nodded grimly. "We've been tracking parts of this group, but this is the clearest evidence we've seen. We believe they're planning a freedom march," their words, not as a protest, but a counterclaim. Reclaiming space they feel they've lost. Terrence's voice was cold steel. "And my wife and daughter? They're on the list," Agent Hughes said plainly. "But you're the symbol. They're the leverage." Lena closed her eyes. Ava, still listening from the stairs, turned and walked away without a word. Her silence was deafening. By morning, news of the preservers' planned march had leaked. Social media buzzed with rumors. Local reporters began tracing the names of the group's suspected members, church leaders, business owners, even a school board vice chair. The town tensed like a coiled spring. Darlington schools went remote by midweek, citing security concerns. Parents kept kids indoors. Downtown shops shuttered. Some white residents wrote open letters condemning the march. Others whispered support behind closed blinds. Terrence felt the atmosphere shifting. No longer subtle racism. This was open defiance, proud hatred flexing its muscles. That's when his phone rang. It was Theo Boomer Maxwell, his former co-pilot, closest friend in the Navy. His voice crackled through the line. "Tell me where to land, T," he said. "We're coming." Terrence didn't need to ask who we meant. 3 black SUVs arrived in Darlington that night. No sirens, no announcements, just quiet footsteps and firm handshakes. Terrence's old unit, 6 Navy veterans, all men of color, all trained, all watching, spread out across the Willis home like shadows. They weren't there to fight. They were there to deter, a different kind of protection, one the local police had never offered. Boomer pulled Terrence aside that night on the back porch. "I saw Ava's podcast," he said. "She's a force." Terrence nodded. "You know," Boomer added, eyes scanning the tree line. "We fought wars together overseas, thinking we were coming home to peace. But sometimes the front line is your front yard." That truth hung between them. The next day, flyers began appearing around town. They weren't printed by the preservers, but someone sympathetic. They showed Ava's face next to a grainy photo of her at a protest. The text beneath read, "Radical Youth. Outsider Values. Is this who represents Darlington?" One flyer was taped to the front door of their home overnight. Another was slipped under Lena's car windshield at the grocery store. Valerie filed new reports. The FBI tightened surveillance. But the damage was psychological. The message was clear. You're being watched. You are not safe. Still, the Willises refused to hide. Ava continued recording sidelines. Lena continued sharing documents with federal investigators. Terrence met with civil rights leaders and planned their presence at the upcoming MLK event. But the town's heartbeat was erratic. Each day felt heavier. Less like resistance, more like battle prep. Then came the final straw. It was the night before the MLK Day celebration. The town was quiet. Streets nearly empty. Terrence had just finished reviewing speech notes. Lena was prepping Ava's outfit for the next day's rally. Valerie was in a Zoom call with media reps. Then came the knock. Terrence opened a door. A uniformed officer stood there. Young, pale, and visibly shaken. "I was told to deliver this directly to you," he said. It was a single sheet of paper. A threat. Typed. Anonymous. "The First Baptist Church will not host your lies. Not while true Americans still breathe. Consider this a warning. Your celebration ends before it starts." Attached was a photo. An aerial shot of the church, with the words, "Ground Zero." Terrence stood motionless. The officer stammered, "Sir, we also received an anonymous call. It said there may be an explosive device on site. Bomb squads en route now." Lena gasped from the hallway. Ava came running down the stairs, her face pale. "No," Terrence whispered. "No." Sirens howled in the distance. Lights flooded the street. And from the church just 2 blocks away, smoke began to rise. Not from fire, not from flames, but from fear finally pushing through the surface. As Terrence rushes toward the scene, Boomer's voice crackles through his earpiece. "'Tis someone just accessed the roof. We've got movement, and it's not ours." Smoke curled into the sky over First Baptist Church, not from fire but from a deactivation flare. A signal used by the bomb squad to confirm a threat had been neutralized. No explosives were found, just a carefully arranged pile of blackened electronics, meant to simulate a device. A warning, not an explosion. But warnings, Terrence knew, could be more paralyzing than violent. The threat was real even if the bomb wasn't. The message couldn't have been clearer. Stop, or we'll make it real next time. That night, Terrence didn't sleep. Neither did Lena. Ava curled up between them on the couch as CNN played on mute, her hands tucked beneath her hoodie sleeves. Terrence kept his uniform pressed and ready beside the front door. The one with the navy wings. The one he hadn't worn publicly since his retirement. Because tomorrow wasn't about protest anymore. It was about principle. Morning came thick with fog, but by 7 a.m., people began arriving on foot, in carpools and buses from neighboring counties. By 9 a.m., the streets around Darlington City Hall swelled with bodies. Black families, college students, military veterans, pastors, activists, journalists, people of every background, some carrying signs, some holding nothing but steady eyes. Terrence stood at the front of the march, his uniform crisp, medals gleaming against his chest like tiny anchors holding him to memory. Lena stood beside him, holding Ava's hand. Valerie Knox flanked them, clipboard in one arm, fire in her eyes. Helicopters hummed above, not military this time, but federal security and media crews, circling slowly, watching from every angle. A woman in the crowd, white, middle-aged, tears in her eyes, stepped forward and handed Terrence a sign. It read, "I was silent. I'm sorry." He took it with a nod, held it high. Then he stepped forward. The march began, one foot in front of the other. Slow, purposeful, no music, no chanting, just the sound of shoes on pavement and hearts daring to beat louder than fear. At first it was a river of hundreds, then thousands. The streets overflowed. Darlington hadn't seen this many people in a decade. The last time the population had spiked was during a Civil War reenactment, celebrating the very history now being rejected in real time. Reporters called it unprecedented. A march that swallowed the town whole. Military veterans from across the country joined in uniform, saluting Terrence as he passed. A group from a local base carried banners reading, "Real Patriots Defend Justice." Students from Morehouse and Spelman walked beside elderly churchgoers. Teens held up signs with Ava's podcast logo. A boy no older than 10 wore a t-shirt that read, "Truth is not treason." White allies didn't linger in the background. They marched up front beside the people they had once only observed. And many of them held handmade signs with confessions. "My grandfather was on the city council that blocked black housing. I'm here to break the cycle. I ignored racism because it didn't hurt me. Not anymore. I benefit from the silence. Today, I choose sound." Terrence never once turned around. He didn't need to. He could feel them behind him, thousands of feet following his thousands of eyes, fixed on what justice actually looked like when it moved. The streets had been closed in every direction, yet still, people spilled into side roads and sidewalks. Some stood on rooftops, capturing drone footage. Others leaned out of apartment windows and wept silently as the wave rolled by. Halfway through the route, Lena leaned into Terrence. "They're watching from every state," she said. "This isn't just Darlington anymore." Terrence nodded once. It never was. The group reached the courthouse steps just before noon. The mayor was nowhere in sight. Neither were half the town's council members. But it didn't matter. Terrence climbed the steps alone, turned and faced the crowd. He raised the sign again. "I was silent. I'm sorry." And then he spoke not through a microphone, but through the slow lifting of his voice. "We are not here to erase Darlington," he said. "We are here to reveal it." Cheers erupted, but Terrence raised his hand for silence. This town was built on stories never told, records buried, voices silenced. But now the truth is walking down Main Street, hand in hand with the future. A small cheer, applause. He glanced to his left, where Ava stood, tears glinting in her eyes. "I've worn this uniform in deserts and jungles. I've saluted flags on foreign soil. But the hardest battlefield I've ever stood on is here on the same grass. They told me I couldn't stand beside my daughter. Silence. thick, sacred. He let the truth settle before finishing. I marched today because silence was never safety. It was surrender. A roar broke through the crowd, waves of sound, fists raised, signs held higher than ever. But then something unexpected happened. Behind the courthouse, 2 unmarked SUVs pulled up. 4 men in plain suits stepped out. The crowd parted as they made their way through. Federal agents. DOJ Civil Rights Division. They approached Valerie first, then Terrence. The lead agent, a black woman with steel gray hair and purpose carved into her face, spoke quietly, her voice only for them. "We're here to confirm the opening of a federal civil rights investigation," she said. "Effective immediately. The town of Darlington is now under review." Valerie nodded. Her hand trembled, just slightly, as she signed the official receipt. Terrence looked out over the crowd. No announcement was needed. The energy shifted. People felt it. A legal tectonic plate had moved beneath their feet. The man who was once pushed from a soccer field had now helped push an entire town into federal accountability. And yet, something deeper stirred. Because even as the investigation launched, even as the crowd erupted into cheers and chants, Terrence's eyes scanned the rooftop of the courthouse. Not from paranoia, but instinct. And that's when he saw it. A shadow. A person slipping away, hooded, retreating into the stairwell. He didn't recognize the figure, but something about the movement was deliberate, calculated. Boomer's voice crackled in his earpiece from a rooftop perch nearby. "See, we've got company. Unknown asset. Just exited the roof. I'm on it." Terrence's face didn't flinch, but inside a knot twisted. Because truth had always been the first battle. But exposure had enemies too. Moments later, a text flashes on Terrence's phone, from the anonymous whistleblower. "The files you have are just the start. Darlington's rot runs through the courthouse. Be ready. They're cleaning house tonight." By the time the sun rose over Darlington the day after the march, the town was no longer the same. The streets were quieter, not from peace but from reckoning. The crowd had dispersed, but their footprints remained in the dust, in the memory, in the historical arc that had finally bent, not because it wanted to, but because it was forced. Federal agents wasted no time. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division set up temporary offices inside the county building, a poetic reversal, occupying the very space where exclusionary policies had once been crafted. Subpoenas rolled out within hours. City records were confiscated. Personal laptops, council files, financial ledgers, collected like evidence from a crime scene. Darlington officials, long smug in their obscurity, now found themselves exposed in the harsh light of federal scrutiny. Emails surfaced. Memos leaked. Meeting transcripts, handwritten notes, and redlined maps dating back to the 1980s painted a damning portrait. Deliberate exclusion. Coordinated obstruction. Calculated silence. Redlining wasn't just history, it was present. Maps showed how black neighborhoods were consistently zoned out of development projects. School boundaries had been quietly redrawn over the years to concentrate funding in predominantly white districts, while black schools fell into disrepair. One document, stamped confidential, revealed a community vision memo from 1994, suggesting that integrating black businesses into Darlington's economic plan would complicate traditional consumer comfort. Another outlined vetting criteria for public board appointments. A handwritten note next to the word diversity. Simply read, "Only if controllable." Federal investigators uncovered fraudulent contractor practices, where black-owned firms were given interview slots for optics, but never considered for selection. They found evidence that complaints filed by black parents about teachers, school policies, even playground safety, were often marked resolved without investigation. It wasn't sloppy governance, it was systemic filtration. And now, it was falling apart. One by one, indictments followed. The town's director of planning and zoning was charged with fraud and discriminatory practices. The former superintendent was indicted for civil rights violations tied to student reassignment programs. 2 council members were forced to resign after financial ties were found linking them to groups associated with the preservers. Even the mayor, previously smug in his plausible deniability, was subpoenaed after a leaked voicemail revealed he had warned the donor to expect chaos now that the black commander won't go quietly. Public trust collapsed. State lawmakers issued statements. Local leaders across Virginia were forced to re-examine their own policies. Investigations launched in 4 nearby counties. But Darlington wasn't just reacting anymore. It was now a case study. Terrence was asked to testify before Congress. He flew to DC under federal protection, flanked by Lena and Ava, who had also been invited. Valerie Knox, seated beside them, whispered, "This is bigger than the town now. You're about to shape federal reform." The hearing was held in a packed chamber. Cameras lined the back wall. Lawmakers leaned forward, eyes sharp, pens ready. Terrence took the stand first. He wore a charcoal suit. No medals, no uniform. Just the truth. He began with Ava's soccer game. The silence, the police, the quiet removal. Then he moved backward, into history, into Darlington's archives, into how respectable racism doesn't shout or burn crosses anymore. It just redirects grants, rewrites maps, and hires based on comfort instead of character. They called it a misunderstanding, he said. But misunderstandings don't last 50 years. He closed with this: "I've defended this country against enemies I could see. The harder war is the one against enemies you're told don't exist." Silence. Then standing ovation. Lena followed. She spoke not as a wife or strategist, but as a woman who had lived under the weight of erasure. She read excerpts from the leaked documents. She described the fear of watching her daughter be targeted. Her voice never shook. Her truth didn't allow it. When Ava took the stand, the room shifted. She wore a blazer over her favorite jeans, a lapel mic clipped to her collar, her podcast logo pinned to her chest. "I didn't set out to be a voice," she began. "I just didn't want the silence to win again." She told the story of Darius, of Miss Townsend, of every kid who messaged her crying because they'd been told to sit down, shut up, or play nice with racism. Her final words broke through the cameras and headlines. "You can't ask us to be the future if you're still punishing us for the past." The next day, her testimony was played on every major network. Ava trended globally under the hashtag "The Future Testified." Policy discussions began immediately. Lawmakers proposed reforms to public school zoning laws. Federal audits of community grant usage were expanded. Civil rights funding received a sudden surge. And in Virginia, the governor issued an executive order requiring equity audits of all public contracts and educational structures statewide. Reparations weren't direct checks, but they started showing up in budgets. More funding for historically underserved schools, diversity mandates for city appointments, state-funded small business incubators, specifically for communities of color. Darlington, now under consent decree, was forced to meet quarterly with DOJ compliance teams. They were given a timeline to reform their systems or face federal seizure of certain administrative functions. Terrence and Lena returned home exhausted, but not defeated. The quiet in their house now felt earned, not forced. Ava continued to record sidelines, but now with producers, a legal team, and a national sponsor. One night, as they sat together in the living room, Terrence received a call from an unfamiliar DC number. He answered, expecting another interview request. But it wasn't press. It was the National Civil Rights Coalition. A committee member spoke gently, her voice rich with formality. "Commander Willis," she said, "we would like to inform you that you've been nominated for the National Civil Rights Leadership Award." Terrence blinked. The woman continued, "It's for your courage, your clarity, and your refusal to let dignity be dismissed. Your service didn't end with a uniform. It began with your voice." He looked at Lena, who was already smiling. Eva looked up from her phone and whispered, "Dad, they finally see you." But Terrence didn't beam. He just exhaled, slowly, fully. Because for the first time in weeks, he felt something deeper than victory. He felt seen. As Terrence ends the call, a letter slides through their mail slot. No return address. Inside, a single photo of Terrence in uniform, circled in red marker. Beneath it, one line: "History has its heroes, but every hero has enemies. Be ready." The courthouse in Richmond wasn't made for spectacle. But on the first day of Willis' Fife town of Darlington, it felt more like a national stage than a federal building. News crews lined the sidewalk. Protesters gathered across the street holding signs that read, "This time, we watch." A field isn't neutral if it excludes. Dignity on trial. Inside courtroom 7B. The air was thick with the kind of anticipation that only years of silence could create. Every seat was filled. Black elders from Darlington wore Sunday hats. College students wore hoodies printed with sidelines. Military veterans stood along the back wall, hands folded across chests, not in protest but in solidarity. Terrence sat beside Valerie Knox, suited in charcoal gray, eyes steady but unreadable. Lena was behind him, flanked by a team of civil rights advocates. Eva sat next to her mother, legs crossed, hands gripping a yellow legal pad, not to take notes, but to anchor her nerves. Darlington's legal team entered with hollow professionalism. 3 white men in navy suits, flanked by a PR consultant and a local defense strategist. Their goal was clear: distance the town from history, minimize, reframe, survive. The judge, a black woman in her 60s named Honorable Deborah Epps, took her seat. Her gaze alone silenced the room. The case began. Valerie started with precision. Her opening statement was not fire. It was ice. Cool, deliberate, irrefutable. "We are not here because of a single event," she said. "We are here because of a culture of exclusion, a system of racism, so well-oiled, it disguised itself as policy." She introduced evidence: the sealed 1997 memo, the redlining maps, the recorded council meetings, the contractor discrimination ledgers. Piece by piece, the town's silence was stripped down to its bones. The defense tried to pivot. They argued that Darlington was evolving, that the town had issued public statements of regret, that the helicopter incident was a miscommunication, not malice. But they hadn't prepared for what came next. Ava's footage. The courtroom lights dimmed. The screen flickered on. There it was. The now infamous video. Unedited. Undeniable. The quiet walk. The stoic father. The trembling daughter. The casual cruelty of a system too practiced to feel ashamed. The jury, a diverse group of 7 women and 5 men, watched without blinking. One white juror covered her mouth. A black man on the panel clenched his fists. When Ava's voice cracked through the speakers, "That's my dad. Why are they taking my dad?" The silence fractured. Someone sniffled. Another whispered, "God." When the lights came back on, the room didn't exhale. It sat with the pain. Valerie let the moment speak. Then she called Terrence to the stand. He didn't rise like a soldier. He rose like a man who had carried too much. But when he sat, something shifted. He didn't testify with volume. He testified with memory. "I wore the uniform of a country that asked for everything," he said, "and I gave it, time, blood, years away from my family. But when I stood beside my daughter on a soccer field, I was treated like a threat, not a father." He described his Navy missions, not to brag but to draw contrast. How the same hands that rescued Marines under fire were later considered dangerous for clapping on public grass. He spoke about his mother, cleaning schools that wouldn't let her attend, about his father, denied loans by banks that now advertised inclusion. When Valerie asked him what he hoped the lawsuit would change, he answered without hesitation, "I don't want a check. I want acknowledgement. I want policy. I want a town that doesn't need a camera to behave right." Cross-examination was mild. The defense hesitated, knowing any aggression would backfire. They asked about his motivations, hinting at ego, activism, publicity. Terrence shut it down with one line: "If standing up for my family makes me controversial, your silence is complicit." Next, Lena took the stand. She walked through the data, the decades of skewed hiring, underfunded schools, failed complaints, but her voice softened when she spoke of Ava. She didn't ask to be the face of anything, she said. She just asked to not watch her father be erased. The jury listened like they were learning how to hear again. And then came Ava, small in stature, monumental in truth. She didn't cry. She didn't preach. She told stories of classmates whispering, of adults shrinking, of being told you're exaggerating every time her world tilted from fairness. "I just wanted to cheer," she said. "That's it. That's all. I wanted to clap for my dad like every other kid." She paused. "And now I speak, because the silence was louder than our joy." Her testimony became a headline by nightfall. "Girl who sparked national reckoning testifies. I wanted to clap." The trial lasted 4 days. On the 5th, the jury returned in less than 3 hours. Their decision, unanimous. Darlington was found liable for systemic civil rights violations, racial discrimination in public contracting, school zoning bias, and failure to enforce equity protocols tied to federal funding. Judge Epps read the verdict slowly, her voice calm but unwavering. "The court hereby orders the town of Darlington to issue formal apologies to the plaintiffs and to the public. Furthermore, they are instructed to pay $11.4 million in damages, $7 million in community restitution, $3 million for immediate educational reform, and $1.4 million to the Willis family for personal and legal damages. She paused, then added something not written in the documents. This court recognizes that no amount of money restores lost dignity. But it begins the process, and that process will not be paused. Gasps. Applause. Reporters sprinted from the courtroom. Outside, the crowd waited in silence until the news broke. Then erupted. Chants. Cheers. Some wept. Others just nodded. Terrence walked out with Lena and Ava on either side. Valerie followed behind, flanked by law clerks, civil rights attorneys, and former clients she had once defended in smaller cases that never got their day in court. Until now. That night, as cameras captured the Willis family returning home, another moment unfolded quietly. An unmarked sedan pulled into their driveway. A man in a navy blue blazer stepped out and approached Terrence with an envelope. "Commander Willis," he said, "I represent the governor's office. You've been recommended to lead a new statewide racial justice task force. Oversight, reform, policy advisement. We'd like your leadership." Terrence didn't respond right away. He looked at Lena. She gave a single nod. He looked at Ava, who grinned and said, "Looks like we're not done yet." The next morning, as the headlines announced Terrence's appointment, Ava receives a package with no sender. Inside is a scorched soccer jersey, hers number 7, burnt at the collar. Beneath it, a note. "You won this time. But we're still on the field." The grass looked different now. It wasn't freshly planted or newly trimmed. The turf hadn't changed, but something in the air had. The field that once bore silent witness to quiet exclusion now stood reborn, repurposed, not through landscaping, but legacy. The sign was unveiled under a bright, unflinching sun. A crowd gathered, hushed in anticipation, as Ava and Terrence stood beneath the draped banner. Lena held the cord gently between her fingers. A Navy bugler played a soft rendition of "Lift Every Voice and Sing." A child's choir followed with "This Little Light of Mine." Tears flickered down more cheeks than expected, including from those who had once been silent in the stands. Then, with one swift pull, the banner fell away. The sign read, "Marilyn Willis Field, in honor of a mother who scrubbed schools that wouldn't let her son dream there, until he changed the map." A hush followed.
Then applause. Long, deep, earned.
Terrence didn't speak. He couldn't. His voice, so often the rallying force behind truth, cracked the moment he saw his mother's name carved into permanence. The woman who once told him, "Keep your back straight, even when they bend your name," was now etched into the foundation of a field that had once pushed him out. Eva reached for his hand. "She's watching," she said softly. And somewhere deep in Terrence's memory, he felt it too. His mother's quiet nod, her mop resting in the corner of an empty classroom, her pride tucked behind fatigue. Now her name stood tall above the game her grandson might one day play freely. That afternoon, Ava hosted a special youth match on the newly renamed field. She'd worked for weeks curating a team roster made up of kids from every part of town. Black, white, Latino, Asian. Kids who'd never spoken in class, now high-fiving after blocked goals. Kids who had once been told, "That position isn't for you," now taking center field with confidence. The game wasn't about winning. It was about proof. Proof that the field could hold more than one story. That the sidelines no longer had to be silent. That when children ran across grass with nothing to fear, history could finally unclench. The match was broadcast live on PBS and simulcasted across several youth networks. Commentators spoke in reverent tones. One described it as the moment Darlington began to rewrite its soul. Ava called the event the game they tried to steal. And it was. But no more. Change didn't sweep through Darlington overnight, but it came, slowly, uneasily, with bumps and wrong turns. But it came. New black-owned businesses opened on Main Street. A bookstore run by a former teacher who once resigned in protest. A cafe founded by two brothers who used to mow lawns for pennies, now sold lattes beside framed protest photos. The school board, under court order, diversified its leadership. New hires came from historically black colleges. Teachers were required to undergo anti-bias training, not as punishment, but as repair. Student-led committees began reviewing curriculum content. Ava served on the media literacy panel. The same girl who was once mocked for recording her truth now sat beside district leaders discussing representation and restorative justice. Terrence declined several political offers. A Senate run. A state superintendent appointment. even whispers of a possible ambassadorship. He said no to all of it. He wasn't interested in title, only in message. Instead, he accepted a series of national speaking tours, each one tailored to a different audience: schools, military bases, town halls, corporate summits. He titled the tour, Sidelines to Center, When Silence Breaks. He told the story over and over again, not to stir pity, but to expose patterns. The kind of patterns that lived inside well-meaning schools and polite neighborhoods. The kind that didn't burn crosses, but quietly buried opportunity. Each speech ended with the same closing line: "I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for space." The room always stood.
And Ava?
Her podcast had now crossed 12 million downloads. She hired a sound engineer, worked with a nonprofit to launch Sideline Scholarships, a micro-grant initiative for Black and brown athletes, excluded from elite sports programs due to bias. She was still a teenager, but she spoke with the weight of lived memory. Colleges vied for her, journalists cited her, activists quoted her. But she still came home, on Sundays. Still curled next to Lena on the couch. Still walked the edge of Marilyn Willis Field in quiet reflection. Sometimes recording voice notes no one else would hear. And then, one evening, a man in a blazer knocked on the Willis door. He introduced himself as a film producer from Los Angeles. His handshake was firm, respectful. "We've been following the story," he said. "There's power in it. Not just news power, cinematic power." Terrence raised a brow. "You want to make a movie?" "Not just a movie," the man said. "A legacy piece. The way it happened, Ava's voice, your mother's name, the threats, the reckoning. It's not just about race, it's about resistance." Lena narrowed her eyes. "And who gets to tell it?" "We want to work with you," he replied, authentically. "We don't want to narrate, we want to amplify." The producer handed over a treatment, 10 pages outlining possible arcs, proposed casting, distribution plans. It was thoughtful, well-researched, careful. But Terrence didn't open it, not yet. That night, after the producer left, the family sat at the kitchen table, silent. A decision unspoken hanging between them. Ava finally broke it. "What if they mess it up?" she asked. "What if they turn it into a feel-good story and skip the pain?" Lena added, "What if they focus on the wrong heroes?" Terrence folded his hands, staring out the window at the field, now lit in soft gold from the sunset. "I don't want this story to be about a savior," he said, "because we didn't get here alone, and we're not done." He turned to Ava. "If we say yes, you lead it, you write it, you tell them how it happened. They follow your truth." Ava didn't answer right away. She looked down at her podcast journal, now filled with names, quotes, grief, and growth. Then she nodded. "Only if I get to start it where it really began," she said. "Not with the helicopter, not with the court, but with a father cheering on a daughter. Just a father, just a daughter." Terrence smiled, soft, broken, proud, because that was the truth. Before the lights, before the lies, before the field became a battleground. It was a simple Saturday, and all he wanted to do was clap. The next morning, as production talks begin, and reporters call for exclusive interviews, Eva opens her inbox and finds a voice memo from an unknown sender, breathless, rushed, and terrified.
Ava.
"They're not done. Darlington isn't what it seems. You need to look into the twins moving in next door. They're not who they say they are." Golden light streamed over Marilyn Willis Field one Saturday morning, illuminating a new chapter in Darlington. Ava stood at midfield, gripping a soccer ball with the same grace she'd learned under pressure. The sky overhead was calm, washed in blue, and instead of the roar of protest, the gentle beat of helicopter rotors filled the air in tribute. Terrence stood on the sideline in civilian clothes, his posture relaxed but alert. Veterans in crisp uniforms and retirees in ball caps formed a solemn line. The Darlington Police Department, once the agents of humiliation, stood beside them. Security now allies. Heads bowed in respect. Community and reconciliation met on that grass. Silence had been traded for unity. Ava tapped the ball to a teammate, dribbled past her marker, and sent a soft pass back to her father, who hadn't expected to reclaim joy in the same place he'd lost it. She winked, and Terrence nodded. That look alone carried decades of accumulated quiet. Meanwhile, low hovering helicopters circled overhead, banners displayed. Honor, justice, visibility. They weren't instruments of intimidation. They were symbols of promise, and the cadence of their blades was no longer threat. It was recognition. Parents, some of whom once avoided eye contact with Terrence, now high-fived him. Children ran laughing across the turf. Coaches from diverse backgrounds cheered goals. Referees walked with dignity. The field had finally become what it was always meant to be, a space where kids belonged. Lena stood nearby, hugging Miss Carter, the teacher who had resigned earlier, and Darius Kimbrough, now a college junior and Ava's podcast roommate in episode 2. The wounds of yesterday had shaped community allies today. At halftime, Terrence was invited to speak. He approached the microphones planted in the infield, sunlight haloing his silhouette. No legal folder, no protest signs, only words shaped by experience and humility. I once thought dignity was my birthright, he began. But I discovered it was a battle fought not with guns, but with truth. We walked away from that field once. Someone said we didn't belong, but look at what belonging looks like now. He paused, gaze drifting upward at the helicopters. They tried to silence a black father. They awakened a nation. Applause thundered, not the polite clapping of award ceremonies, but genuine recognition. Tears shimmered on cheeks of grandparents and toddlers alike. Afterward, veterans saluted him from the sidelines. Some hugged him, battle brothers turned solidarity brothers. The Darlington PD formed a respectful barrier between the crowd and the players, offering water bottles, waving off parents politely, supporting community, not obstructing it. Ava returned to the field, lifted the trophy they'd played for, and held it high, her teammates gathering around. She looked at her father. He pointed upward to the helicopters, then to her. She smiled, squared her shoulders, and kicked the ball into the goal. In that moment, a father's proud eyes, a daughter's triumphant shot, and the sky filled with symbolic flight. It felt like a symbolic closure, yet somehow it was only the start. That evening, as dusk pulled violet shadows across Marilyn Willis Field, Terrence stood alone. The grass rustled softly beneath his feet. Police lights faded in the distance. Veterans dispersed into hometown hush. He closed his eyes and exhaled memory. The humiliation, the threats, the lawsuits, all weighed less beneath that sky. But he also carried resolve. Then from the periphery of his vision, a new moving van rolled in. It stopped across the street. 2 young boys, identical twins, stepped out with their mother. She wore a naval officer's cap. The boys held miniature soccer cleats and backpacks that read, Junior Seaman Rollins. Terrence watched them unpack, saw them eyeing the field, saw their mother flash a marked salute at him. No words passed. The gesture spoke. History was watching, and it was vigilant. The wind carried one thought across that peaceful field. A new family has arrived. A Black Navy veteran with twin boys. The next chapter begins. If this story shook something in you, don't scroll past it. Ask your school, your town, your workplace. Who's being silenced here? Share this not for views, but for visibility. Justice doesn't need a crowd. It just needs someone who refuses to look away. Be that someone, right where you are.